Every year, millions of Americans pack up everything they own and move to a big city. They tell everyone it's for the job, the opportunity, the energy. But something else is happening under the surface that almost nobody talks about. Because the city doesn't just change your address, it changes your brain. The person who arrives in New York or Chicago or Los Angeles is not the same person who leaves 5 years later. And the shift isn't just about lifestyle, it runs deeper than that. It rewires how you think, how you trust, how you love, and how you see yourself. This is the psychology of Americans who move to big cities, and some of what you're about to hear might make you uncomfortable. Layer 1. Why they leave in the first place. Before understanding what the city does to a person, it helps to understand what pushes them toward it. Most people assume it comes down to ambition, and yes, that plays a role. But psychology tells a more complicated story. Researchers who study migration patterns in the United States have found that the decision to move to a big city is rarely just about a job offer or a better salary. More often, it is driven by what psychologists call identity seeking, a deep, restless feeling that the life you are living does not match the life you believe you are capable of living. For many Americans, especially those from small towns or suburbs, the city represents something almost mythological. It is the place where people go to become who they were always supposed to be. There is also a powerful pull called the fresh start effect. Studies in behavioral psychology show that people are more motivated to pursue change when they attach it to a new beginning. A new city is the ultimate blank slate. No one there knows who you were in high school. No one remembers the version of you that failed or quit or stayed too long in the wrong relationship. The city offers something rare and intoxicating: anonymity. But here is what most people don't anticipate. The same anonymity that feels freeing at first becomes one of the most psychologically challenging forces they will ever face. Layer 2. The arrival when the fantasy meets reality. The first few weeks in a big city feel like a movie. There is energy everywhere. The streets are loud and alive. Every block has something new. And for a brief window of time, the person who just moved feels like they made the best decision of their life. Psychologists call this the honeymoon phase. It mirrors the early stage of a new relationship. The brain is flooded with dopamine. Everything feels exciting precisely because it is unfamiliar. Novelty triggers the brain's reward system in a way that routine never can. But around the 6-week mark, something shifts. The noise that once felt electric starts to feel like pressure. The crowds that seemed full of possibility start to feel suffocating. The apartment that felt like a launching pad starts to feel like a very small, very expensive box. This is when the psychological work actually begins. The technical term is adjustment disorder. It is not a serious mental illness. It simply describes the real emotional stress that comes when a person's expectations collide with their actual circumstances. And in a big city, that collision can be brutal. Because the city does not slow down for anyone. It does not check in on you. It does not ask how you are adjusting. It simply keeps moving, with or without you. And the person who left their hometown full of confidence starts to feel something they did not expect to feel. Small. Layer 3. The identity fracture. This is where the psychology gets fascinating. When people move to a big city, they almost always go through what researchers call an identity disruption. The version of themselves that existed back home was built on a specific set of relationships, roles, and environments. They were someone's neighbor, someone's regular at the coffee shop, someone's childhood friend. In the city, none of that exists anymore. And so the brain does something automatic and slightly unsettling. It starts to rebuild. It starts asking quietly at first and then louder, "Who am I?" when no one already knows the answer. This question is not comfortable, but it is one of the most psychologically significant things that can happen to a person. Some people respond to this disruption by overcorrecting. They reinvent themselves almost entirely. New wardrobe, new vocabulary, new social circle, new opinions. They start distancing themselves from where they came from, almost like they are ashamed of it. Psychologists call this identity foreclosure in reverse. Instead of committing too early to an identity, they run from the one they already had. Others go the opposite direction. They cling to their hometown identity so tightly that they resist everything the city is offering. They surround themselves only with people from the same region. They reject city culture before they ever truly encounter it. And they spend years in a big city while never really arriving. The healthiest psychological response is the one that is also the hardest. Sitting with the uncertainty. Letting the old identity soften without forcing a new one to take its place too quickly. Allowing the city to ask the question without rushing to answer it. Most people are not taught how to do this, and that gap creates the next problem. Layer 4. The loneliness. Nobody warns you about. Here's a fact that surprises most people. Big cities are some of the loneliest places in the United States. Despite being surrounded by millions of people, studies consistently show that urban residents report higher rates of loneliness and social isolation than people living in rural or suburban areas. The density of the population does not protect against disconnection. In many ways, it makes it worse. Psychologists explain this through a concept called ambient belonging. In smaller communities, people experience a passive sense of connection just from being recognized. The cashier who knows your name. The neighbor who waves when you pull into the driveway. The bartender who starts pouring your drink before you even sit down. These small moments are not deep relationships, but they signal something important to the brain. You are known here. You belong. In a big city, those signals vanish almost completely. You can ride a subway car with 200 people and make eye contact with none of them. You can live in an apartment building for 3 years and never learn the name of the person next door. You can work in an office full of colleagues and go home feeling completely unseen. The brain interprets this absence of signal as a threat. The same neural pathways that process physical pain also process social rejection. And chronic loneliness in a big city does not feel like sadness. It feels more like a low hum of tension that never fully goes away. What makes this especially hard is that city culture does not give people much permission to admit this. The narrative of moving to the city is supposed to be exciting, successful, enviable. Admitting that you are lonely in New York feels like admitting the dream isn't working. So most people don't say it out loud. They perform fine, and the loneliness compounds in silence. Layer 5. How the city rewires the brain. This is not metaphor, this is biology. Living in a dense urban environment has measurable effects on brain structure and function. Research using brain imaging has shown that people who live in cities show higher activation in the amygdala, the part of the brain responsible for processing stress and perceived threats, compared to people living in rural areas. And this difference shows up even in people who were raised in rural areas but moved to cities as adults. What does that mean in plain terms? It means the city trains your brain to stay alert, always scanning, always processing. The volume of stimulation in a big city is unlike anything the human nervous system evolved to handle. Traffic noise, crowds, bright lights, construction, the constant movement of thousands of strangers. The brain cannot filter all of that out, so it learns to manage it by staying in a mild state of low-level vigilance almost all the time. Over months and years, this rewires certain automatic responses. City dwellers tend to become faster processors of social information. They read strangers more quickly, make judgments sooner, and trust less by default. Not because they are worse people, but because their environment has trained them to move fast and stay guarded. The city also changes how people relate to time. Urban life runs on a schedule that has no natural breaks. There is always something open, always somewhere to be, always another option. And this constant optionality creates a psychological condition that researchers sometimes call the paradox of choice, where having more options actually makes it harder to feel satisfied with any of them. The person who grew up in a small town where Friday night meant 1 or 2 predictable options suddenly lives in a city with thousands of choices every single night. And instead of feeling liberated, many of them feel quietly paralyzed. Layer 6. The performance of city life. One of the most under-examined aspects of urban psychology is how much of city life is performance. In a big city, especially one with a strong culture around status and success, people develop what psychologists call a social presentation layer, a curated version of themselves that they show to the world. The clothes, the neighborhood they live in, the restaurants they go to, the job title they lead with at every party. This is not unique to cities, but it intensifies dramatically in them. Part of the reason is the anonymity paradox. In a city where no one knows you, the only information people have about you is what you show them. And so the pressure to signal success, taste, and relevance becomes enormous. You are constantly being evaluated by strangers, and you know it. This creates a specific kind of psychological exhaustion that is hard to name but very easy to feel. It is the fatigue that comes not from doing too much, but from managing how you appear while doing it. Social media amplifies this significantly. For Americans who move to cities, platforms like Instagram and LinkedIn become tools for narrating the city life they are living. The rooftop parties, the career milestones, the cultural events. What gets posted is the highlight reel, not the Tuesday night when they ate cereal for dinner, alone in a studio apartment, and wondered if they made a mistake. The gap between the performance and the private reality is where a lot of urban psychological strain quietly lives. And over time, the performance can start to feel more real than the reality. Some people forget who they actually are underneath all of it. They stop knowing what they genuinely enjoy versus what they enjoy being seen to enjoy. The line between authentic preference and social signaling gets blurry in ways that are hard to untangle. Layer 7. What the city actually teaches you. For all of its psychological weight, the city is also one of the most powerful developmental environments a person can move through. Exposure to radical diversity, not just racial or cultural diversity, but diversity of thought, lifestyle, belief, and experience, does something important to the brain. It builds what psychologists call cognitive flexibility, the ability to hold multiple perspectives at once without feeling threatened by any of them. People who have lived in big cities for several years tend to become more comfortable with ambiguity. They stop needing everything to fit into neat categories. They get better at separating their emotions from their judgments. These are not small skills. In many ways, they are the skills most needed to navigate modern adult life. The city also teaches resilience in a very specific and unglamorous way. Not the motivational poster kind of resilience. The quiet kind that comes from figuring out how to navigate a broken subway system when you are already late, how to negotiate with a landlord who won't fix your heat, how to start over socially in a place where no one is waiting to welcome you. Small survivals accumulate, and they build a kind of confidence that is hard to develop any other way. There is also something that happens relationally. Because city friendships are harder to form, the ones that do form tend to carry more intentionality. You are not friends with someone simply because you grew up on the same block. You are friends with them because you chose each other. In a city of millions, that choice feels significant. Layer 8. The people who stay and the people who leave. Not everyone who moves to a big city stays there forever, and the psychology behind who stays and who eventually leaves tells us a lot about what the city experience actually does to a person. Research suggests that people who thrive long-term in urban environments tend to share a few consistent traits. They have a high tolerance for ambiguity. They are comfortable being alone without feeling lonely, which is a meaningful distinction. They find a community, not just a social scene, within the first year or two. And they develop what psychologists call an urban identity, a genuine sense of belonging to the city itself, not just to their apartment, their job, or their social circle. The people who leave often do so for reasons that go deeper than cost of living or weather, though those are real factors. More often, they leave because the city asked too much of them psychologically and gave back too little of what they needed to feel grounded. They were willing to perform, but not willing to disappear. And at some point, the performance stopped feeling worth it. What is interesting is that both groups, those who stay and those who leave, are often changed in lasting ways. The city gets into you. Even if you move back to the suburb or the small town eventually, you carry a different orientation toward the world. Your tolerance for complexity is wider. Your assumptions about how people live are looser. Your sense of what is possible has expanded in ways that do not compress back down. The city is not for everyone, but the experience of testing yourself against it, of asking who you are when no one already knows the answer, changes the shape of a person in ways that are very hard to fully undo. Layer 9. The quiet crisis that most city dwellers never name. Here is where it gets uncomfortable. Many Americans who have been living in big cities for years are carrying something they have not fully processed. A quiet crisis of meaning that sits underneath all the motion and noise and ambition. The city is extraordinary at providing stimulation. It is much less good at providing stillness. And without stillness, certain questions never get asked. Questions like, is this the life I actually want? Or is it just the life I worked very hard to build? Am I staying because I love it here? Or because leaving feels like admitting something I am not ready to admit? These questions do not announce themselves loudly. They surface in small moments. On a Sunday afternoon when the city is unusually quiet, in the middle of a party where everyone around you is having a great time, but something in you feels absent. At 2 a.m., when you cannot sleep, and you find yourself looking at photos from a place that felt slower and simpler, and wondering why you feel nostalgic for something you chose to leave. Psychologists who specialize in urban mental health describe this experience as meaning fatigue. The exhaustion that comes not from lack of activity, but from activity that is gradually disconnected from purpose. The city keeps moving, it always keeps moving. And after enough years inside that motion, some people realize they have been running so fast they forgot to ask where they were going. And the most unsettling part of that realization is what tends to follow it. Because once that question surfaces, once a person really starts sitting with it honestly, the answer they find is rarely simple. It does not lead neatly back to where they came from. It does not always point forward either. It points somewhere most people are not prepared to look. Inward. Toward a version of themselves that the city helped create but cannot help them understand. And what that person finds when they look there